Tonight, inflation sticking point. Consumer prices easing still at an all-time high. Plus, a Senate bill to ban abortion after 15 weeks. And a mother's faith.
I've been very blessed and certainly blessed with the faith that's given me a hope and a strength to endure and to know that Jim's in a better place.
After the horrific beheading of journalist James Foley at the hands of ISIS terrorists. And growing consensus about a dire need for mental health services in America.
These things happen even within the church.
All this and more on Faith Nation. Well, inflation persists. Welcome to Faith Nation in Washington. I'm Tara Mergener. Gas prices might be going down, but inflation, well, that is still on the rise. That is the consensus from the August Consumer Price Index numbers released earlier today. Overall, inflation is still running at an annual rate of over 8%, mainly because of increased costs for food, electricity, and other goods and services. The White House, however, claims today's data points to progress and bringing down global inflation, praising the fact gas prices are down an average of $1.30 a gallon since the start of the summer. President Biden did acknowledge it will take more time to bring inflation down, but believes his economic policies are working. Today's report again raises concerns of more Federal Reserve interest rate hikes and a possible recession. That inflation news sent the stock market plummeting today. The Dow Jones ended down more than 1,200 points, and the S&P closed down nearly 180 points, the worst day on Wall Street since June of 2020. Well, here with us now is Stephen Moore, chairman of FreedomWorks Task Force on Economic Revival. Steve, you know, today we saw the Dow take a major plunge after this even worse than expected inflation report. What kind of effect is this persistent inflation having on the broader economy? And we've asked this question a lot. We'll ask it again. Are we already in an economic recession?
Yeah, well, by the way, I very seldom admit that I'm wrong, but I was wrong about this inflation figure that came out. I thought it would be much better than it was. And you're right, it was a very disappointing number. You're also right that we have seen a reduction in gas prices over the last 3 months. But almost everything else seems to be rising in price, and that counteracted the reduction in gas prices. So electric utility costs are up. Food prices obviously are up, as everyone knows. Transportation costs are up. And the other big one is housing, like rental costs for renting a home or an apartment are way up. And so Americans continue to run behind. Their wages continue to run behind these tidal waves of higher prices, and therefore Americans are getting poorer. We estimate that the average family has lost somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 of purchasing power because of this stampede of inflation that doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon.
No, it doesn't. And since it's persisting, is there any room for hope given the dips we've seen in the past couple of reports?
Well, first of all, the other big story that you just mentioned is the massive sell-off in the stock market today. Let's just hope that's a one-day phenomenon and not the start of a trend. But that, as you said, that was the worst day for the stock market this year. And those are big, big declines. And so people's wealth really got hit hard as well here. Now, I've got to tell you that I do believe that we're going to see some declines in inflation in the months ahead. So hopefully we peaked on inflation. But I've got to remind you that the Fed target rate for inflation is 2%, and we're 4 times higher than that right now. We're at 8.3%. So yes, the Fed is going to have to take some aggressive action in raising rates. And I got to tell you this too, the mortgage rate when Trump left office was about 2.6%. The mortgage rate today nationally is over 6%.
Right. So in your opinion, raising these interest rates, are they going to have any meaningful impact, generally speaking?
They will bring inflation down, but it's a painful way to do it. You know, it's like getting your wisdom teeth pulled. It's really painful. But the Fed has to get that inflation down. We can't go on with inflation this long, or it'll bankrupt the country. But most of the help has to come from Congress and the president. That's why it's almost comical that the president called this bill that he signed today the Inflation Reduction Act. I think everybody knows if you had $500 billion of spending, that increases demand. And then if you increase taxes by $500 billion, that reduces supply. So both of those factors make inflation worse, not better. And by the way, can you think of a worse day for the president to sign a bill called the Inflation Reduction Act than today?
Yeah, times certainly are tough. We've got a lot to watch. Steve, thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you.
A nationwide 15-week ban on abortions. That's what Senator Lindsey Graham is proposing today in the newly introduced Protecting Pain-Capable Unborn Children from Late-Term Abortions Act.
The science tells us that the 15-week period, the nerve endings of the baby, are pretty well developed and the child feels pain. So here's our point, that if you have to provide anesthesia to keep the baby from feeling pain to help save its life, should we as a nation be aborting babies that can feel excruciating pain from an abortion?
This plan comes in the wake of efforts by Democrats to ensure nationwide abortion access. Graham calling that legislation extreme and out of touch with Americans and urging fellow lawmakers to reject it and instead consider his proposed bill, which he says is for the nation as a whole, in line with science and with precedent set by the rest of the civilized world. The White House is pushing back today, accusing Republicans of being focused on taking rights away from women by putting their personal health care decisions into the hands of politicians. A major new revelation exposing concerns over China's collection of user data on Twitter. In the Senate hearing today, a whistleblower from the social media giant accusing Twitter of misleading the public over security concerns.
They don't know what data they have, where it lives, or where it came from, and so, unsurprisingly, they can't protect it. And this leads to the second problem, which is the employees then have to have too much access to too much data and to too many systems.
The former security chief at Twitter accusing the company of failures in cybersecurity that make it vulnerable to exploitation. Joining us now is Will Tebow, tech policy expert at the Heritage Foundation. Will, thanks again for coming on Faith Nation tonight. Will, you were watching this whistleblower hearing on the Hill today. Is Twitter vulnerable to Russian and Chinese influence?
Tara, they're more than vulnerable. They're already exposed. What we know is that over 4,000 employees at Twitter have access, unrestricted, to private user data, personal messages, and the entire administrative application of the Twitter platform. And we know this includes at least one Chinese foreign agent, 2 Indians, a Saudi, and who knows how many others. And we don't know because Twitter isn't interested in finding out, and we have no legal means to force them to find out.
So what kind of risks are we talking about, these cyber vulnerabilities? What do they pose to national security?
Well, just imagine, should the Chinese, for example, having tens of millions of Americans' private messages, their location, their IP addresses, their other browsing history. You know, we don't realize that when you open Twitter on your iPhone, for example, Twitter will be able to access data from other applications you use on that phone. Perhaps you're a military officer who works in a secure facility and you bring your phone close by. That's all information Twitter is able to glean, and that is subsequently available to almost half of the company. That's scary, and it's even more troubling that the portion of the Twitter employees who have access to this private data include foreign agents. The security risk is not a risk. It is something real that we have to take action immediately to remedy.
That sounds really scary. Well, Zatko said today there was at least one Chinese spy working at Twitter while he was there. So what kind of damage could an insider threat, pose, a threat? What could he pose?
That Chinese spy could take the account of a senator or perhaps President Biden and tweet nefarious information. Perhaps it's part of a larger information warfare campaign to cause confusion in a time of crisis, at home or abroad. That's, I think, the clearest kind of top line risk to which we're exposed because of that we know we're exposed to because of these revelations. But, it's not even about the foreign actors who have access to this information. We have a leftist company that has access to all of these Americans' information, and we don't know what has happened to private user data. We don't know what privileged conversations have been leaked or stored in a private way that's illegal and violative of privacy rights and of First Amendment conversation. It is obviously a national security threat that is real, but it's also a severe violation of an American's expectation that his or her conversations are private and valuable, because of that privacy. But the World Economic Forum maxim that you own nothing is already true in the case of Twitter.
All right. Well, that gives us an awful lot to think about. Little scary scenarios there. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tara.
Turning overseas, where the long goodbye enters a fifth day in the United Kingdom ahead of Monday's funeral for Queen Elizabeth II. Today, the Queen's casket making its way from Edinburgh, Scotland to London. There, the remains of Britain's longest reigning monarch will lay overnight at Buckingham Palace before lying in state in Westminster Hall tomorrow. All along her route home, people standing in lines up to a mile long to pay their respects. Coming up, a mother's faith in the face of unimaginable nightmare. This year marks 10 years since the capture of American journalist Austin Tice, abducted covering Syria's civil war in August of 2012. This 43-second video marks the last time the Georgetown law student, U.S. Marine and Eagle Scout was seen alive. Tice, now one of the longest-held hostages in U.S. history. After his parents met with President Biden earlier this year, the White House reached out to Syria, but so far there has been no acknowledgement Tice is being held captive. The family, though, holding out hope in the wake of a prisoner swap for captured former Marine Trevor Reed. One mother's Christian faith is shining through, though, after the public beheading of her son. This summer marking 8 years since ISIS terrorists killed American journalist James Foley. CBN's Gabe LaMonica spoke with his mother, Diane, who credits her faith with giving her the strength to endure and to meet one of her son's killers face to face.
This is James Wright Foley.
After their son's brutal beheading was seen on screens and smartphones around the world, the Foley family walked out of their home in 2014 to face a crowd of cameras.
We know Jimmy's free. He's finally free. And we know he's in God's hands. And we know he's done God's work. And we know he's in heaven.
The Foley's faith overpowering that impromptu front yard appearance.
Every time we started to get despondent all over these 2 years, we thought of Jim. We thought of Jim and his courage, and in the midst of his suffering, he was helping the other prisoners. There were a couple of much younger people in that cell. Jim was one of the older ones, and he would sometimes just hold one of them, we're told.
James Foley's drive to tell stories led to his capture in 2011 and being detained for 44 days in Libya at the hands of loyalists to then-dictator Muammar Gaddafi.
I remember getting photographed with a cell phone. My bloodied head from the blows, getting photographed up close and thinking, this is where they find all these photographs that are evidence of war crimes someday, and realizing this is me now.
Less than 2 years later, Foley was back in the field covering the Syrian civil war. There, he was captured and later infamously beheaded by Islamic State terrorists.
The first thing you lose in war is the truth, right?
Now, nearly a decade since the death of her son James, Diane Foley's faith sustains her.
I've been very blessed and certainly blessed with the faith that's given me a hope and a strength to endure and to know that Jim's in a better place.
It's through that lens that Foley sees her son's killers.
Our Lord didn't put Jimmy in that situation. It's people who we people are capable of some very nasty things. We Western nations in our country have not been lily white, let's face it. We've done some nasty stuff ourselves after 9/11, Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo. We have some things to hang our own heads in shame.
Even taking the extraordinary step of meeting one of those men face to face.
I met with him 3 times, and I felt that was helpful. I felt it was helpful for Alexander and for myself. I know Jim would have met with him. He wouldn't have wanted me to be afraid of him. And he would have wanted me to let him know the kind of who Jim was. It was the right thing to do. If I truly feel I'm a Christian, that we should be willing to talk to one another, even and hopefully at some point forgive one another.
The Foley Foundation estimates at least 67 Americans remain captive or imprisoned abroad.
Return of Americans is still not a priority.
Foley believes the U.S. could have done more for James and must do more now for those other Americans held around the world. Gabe LaMonica, CBN News.
And prayers to that family. Well, the struggle with stigma, how the church can do more to help those dealing with depression when we come back. This is something. New figures from the CDC show almost a quarter of all young adults are receiving mental health care treatment. Last year, more than 23% of 18 through 44-year-olds sought such care. That is up from 18.5%, the biggest increase since 2019. Adults ages 45 to 64 receiving mental health treatment saw a modest increase as well, from 20.2% to 21.2%. For adults 65 and up, mental health care decreased slightly from 19.4% to 18.9%. While there is so much on which Americans disagree, there is growing consensus around the need for greater access to mental health services. But talking about the issue is not always easy. Oftentimes, people feel stigma and shame. CBN News medical reporter Lori Johnson explains how some churches are making it easier for people to share their struggles.
In the name of Jesus.
Dr. Tama Bryant, an ordained minister and clinical psychologist, knows firsthand how Christians can spiral into despair.
These things happen even within the church.
In her book, Homecoming, Dr. Bryant describes overcoming her trauma from sexual assault and keeping her faith by using therapeutic approaches, including one of her favorites, praise dance.
Some survivors get to a place where they hate their bodies because it's the place of the violation. But this is really a gift from God. And so to be able to reclaim it, to honor it, to move our bodies, to dance to the glory of God has been a wonderful part of my healing.
As president-elect of the American Psychological Association, Dr. Bryant says the church needs to create a culture where people can admit they're struggling and seek help.
I know in my church tradition, when people say, "How are you?" the usual answer is blessed, or "I'm blessed and highly favored." And so we want to get to a place where people can say, "I'm blessed, and what is the rest of the story? What is the fuller story?"
The tide is starting to change. While many churches are beginning to signal to their members that it's okay to struggle with mental health issues, some are taking it a step further by developing ministries to help people with these types of problems. At New Life Virginia Beach, Dr. Cyrus Williams leads a team of Christian professionals who treat people in the comfort of their own church.
Because we do the counseling here. That's the unique part about it. We do the counseling here in the church. So we try to take away that stigma.
Demand is high given the growing number of those struggling with depression and anxiety.
And then we get into addiction counseling. We may go into more of some trauma that people are dealing with spiritual trauma, sexual trauma, any kind of violence, and then suicide is a big issue.
While counseling can be affordable for some, the goal is to make it achievable for all who need it.
To get to a nominal pay, we need really donations for people to donate salaries. We have people, if they donate money for a salary, we can see so many more people.
The ministry has become a natural progression because of the positive path pastors have taken from the pulpit regarding mental health issues.
We, as pastors, recognize we're not clinicians. We don't provide mental health care, but we do recognize that it is an essential part of being whole before the Lord. And so we want to partner with those who are professionals, just like we would partner with a doctor who is a professional in dealing with cancer or other sicknesses.
New Life Church also hosts mental health forums and seminars.
And so we wanted to make sure that our congregants, our leaders, were equipped to be able to recognize symptoms of people who are struggling with mental health issues and could then refer them or get them the help that they need.
So while mental health problems within the church can still be considered taboo, more leaders are trying to erase the shame so people can get the help they need. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Finally tonight, Liberty University students are lending a helping hand in Kentucky, where communities were hit hard by floods over the summer. Students from the Christian University in Virginia kicking off a new semester with Hearts of Service. The university's disaster relief initiative, called LU Serve Now, spent the majority of their time in Jackson cleaning out a family's trailer. Liberty partnered with Samaritan's Purse, a Christian relief organization known for providing physical and spiritual aid to those in need. Many students taking time to pray over the families they were serving. A second group is headed to Mayfield in October to rebuild homes ravaged by a tornado last year. That is going to do it for Faith Nation. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great night.